Welcome to a special edition of Conversation with Friends. This week we are talking about God as our refuge in our sermon series, and we've invited Alicia McMillan, who is our Director of Worship and Music, as well as our organist, to share her story because she has a unique perspective in that she is a political refugee from Poland. And so we're just going to jump right into that, and with everything going on in the Ukraine and with Russia and that conflict, we think that her perspective would be beneficial for us this morning. So tell us a little bit about, you are a refugee from Poland. So tell us that story a little bit. I don't know if people know that you, they just know you as the organist and the Director of Worship and Music, but they don't know your full story.
No. So I was born in Poland in the 70s and raised under the communist regime, and my father was a member of the Solidarity Party, which opposed communism. And so as a result, he would have been imprisoned. And so he escaped Poland in 1983 by himself, just going to Austria and saying that he was just going to buy materials for his business. And he never came back. How old were you at the time?
How old were you?
I was 9 years old, and I didn't know that my father would never come back. I was not told anything because there were spies, listening, and so it was withheld from me so I wouldn't say something accidentally. And when he left, we were in Poland for 3 more years. They would not let us out because the country wanted him to come back so they could put him in prison. And so it was through the help of the Red Cross and the family reunification program that we were finally able to leave. He was in a camp in Austria for about 6 months. And at that point, he was granted asylum in the United States. And the Catholic charity Caritas it helped him to come out here, and he was in St. Louis with other men. He flew in, and they were able to help him in the first, beginning, tell him how to live in the U.S. He has this sheet of paper that says, this is how you live in the U.S. This is how you go to the bank. This is how you, do this, and it's really interesting. Some just basic things because it's so different.
And so during this time, he had left. When did you know he wasn't coming, or when did you get informed that he wasn't
I never knew, and that's, I think, what's so hard for refugees today. These women and children who are leaving, and their fathers and brothers and uncles and husbands going back to fight. I, as a child, never knew. Every day I thought, oh, is he coming back? Is he never coming back? We would get communication from him, but sometimes it would be cut off, and so it was this really uncertain time.
And when you got communication, did you know did you think he was in Austria still? Did you know he was in the U.S.?
We knew he would call, but sometimes if my mom said anything political, they would cut off the conversation, and we couldn't talk to him for many months. They also read all his letters. They opened them. They didn't even try to hide it. It was just all put in a plastic bag, all ripped up, and some of them probably didn't come through.
I would love for you to speak a little bit more about what life was like over there. And you could even compare it to your time in the United States, but what was it like living in a communist country? How did it differ? How's it different?
I had a happy childhood. I didn't know any better. That was life for me. But things were difficult. My grandfather had to get up at 3, 4 in the morning just to stand in line to buy fresh milk because there was limited food. And there was a time when we had coupons for food. So you'd have a little piece of paper that said meat, eggs, whatever else, alcohol, chocolate, and you could only get so much. But it was scarce, so if you went to the store late, there's nothing left, the shelves were empty. We had to buy food illegally sometimes from a farmer who would come to our house in the middle of the night, and I remember I was always scared. I was like, is this a witch, who's coming to our house? It was kind of a weird thing. Because you were not allowed to sell anything directly to anyone else. You had to sell it to the government. So it was, hard. We were taught history with a bias, definitely bias. We were brainwashed to love Russians and hate Germans. The history of World War I and II are all very, very pro-Russian and anti-Germans. The Russians were our saviors, and the Germans did all the bad things. We were forced to learn Russian as a first foreign language. I think that started in 5th grade, and then in 7th grade you could choose German or French. But so we all had to learn Russian. There were times during the Chernobyl disaster that things were really scary. During martial law, things were very scary when there's a Polish priest, Popiełuszka, who was murdered by the government for speaking out against the government in the church. But otherwise, I mean, I had happy childhood memories. We were very close to our family, and church was a big part of our lives. So.
I remember you telling a story one time about what it was like to have phone calls with your friends. Can you tell people that?
Well, we think that it's science fiction that there are spies listening to our conversations, but when I talked to my friends on the phone, someone was listening, and we would joke. We were like, say, well, these, we would call them cows. We were being, sarcastic, and said, oh, this woman's listening, they're so mean. And they would come on the phone and say, girls, why don't you be nice? That's not a nice thing to say. So, I mean, there was proof. They didn't even try to hide it. And there were spies everywhere, My mom had coworkers who were like very social and nice, and they, got really close to you, and people loved them, and then they later found out that they were spying, and whatever you said was being passed on to the government. The police was always something you feared. You never trusted the police. So people had to literally lie, cheat, and steal just to survive sometimes.
What does that do to you? To, grow up sort of suspicious?
Yeah, well, you just always question everything, I guess, and you don't trust as well. You don't trust the institutions and the government.
What does that do to your faith? Or did you have, how would you describe your faith? Let's back up. How would you have described your faith at this time?
Well, I was brought up Catholic. Poland is like 95 or more % Catholic, and it's a huge part of the culture and every person's life there. So we're very faithful people and very involved in the church. And the Pope was a great leader, especially because we had a Polish Pope. He really helped to give people hope, and so that was a refuge, I think, for the Polish people, is the church and their faith, especially during these difficult times. And that was the place where they felt safe, where the church, spoke out against the government. If you were in a communist party, if you were a leader in the communist party, you couldn't attend church because you would lose your status. And so that was one way that Polish people really, kept their faith, I think, and felt the strength from God and from their faith.
So then how did you keep it for yourself? I mean, personally, and going through this, was it just so ingrained that you're like, of course, I mean, this is just how life is, or this is how life with God is, or did you ever question that when you were going through?
I did go through questioning of that, but it was not until college time when I was introduced to the Protestant church.
Okay.
And that's a whole other conversation.
Totally. Interesting. And it wasn't until you were in America, too. So
right.
You didn't really question
I mean,
it.
I was 12 when I left.
Right.
So I was still very young,
So you came here. Tell us your experience of you arrived, and you were in a completely new place. Did you get the list of how to behave as well, or what was it like for you?
Well, first of all, I did not want to come to the United States. I was happy as a child. I had great friends in school. I was well adjusted. I loved my life as a kid. I guess my parents protected me and made everything good, other than my father not being there.
I think it's interesting that you said, first of all, that you're happy in a communist regime. I think often we wouldn't think of happiness.
Yeah.
So I think that's I don't know, that just stood out to me when you said that in your story as well. So
I had a wonderful family, grandparents that we always spent summers there, and I have some wonderful childhood memories that I think of fondly today. So, and I didn't know any better, as a kid, you just, you don't know that much.
Right.
So I didn't want to leave all that. I mean, I was happy. I didn't want to leave. And it was a huge, drastic change, obviously. It's a culture shock when you come. We took a little English, but there's the first year I think is the hardest because of the language barrier. It takes about a year to learn a language fluently. And just
English is not
the
an easy
culture shock,
language,
you just don't know what to expect. Everything is different. Food is different. Food tastes different. Medication's different. I mean, everything about your life, even like door handles and light switches, everything, everywhere you turn, things work differently. They are different. I had never seen African Americans before, and I was fascinated. I think of them as the ultimate American to me. When you ask me to think about an American person, I imagine a black person. So it was a big culture shock, and I got sick when we first came. My sister was like, I love this. This is great. She went to all the machines and she was getting, snacks and everything. There's so much stuff. You go to the store and there's like a million things on the shelf and you're like, oh my gosh, this is heaven. I've never seen anything like it. She was just like loving it. She was younger. And I was like, no, I have a harder time with change. It's just a personality, I guess. But I got really sick. Like I was super sick. I had a physical reaction when we got here. And I couldn't get well, actually, of American drugs. My mom had to ask my aunt to send me meds from Poland. So, and it was hard going to school. Middle school, you can imagine, middle school's already hard.
Right.
I had a girl who hated me because I was Polish. She said, stupid Polak to me all the time. She would get in line, trip me all the time, punch me, like she would just get in front of me or behind me on purpose all the time just to,
And did other kids watch this happen and just like let it happen? They were...
and I couldn't speak English, so, I didn't say anything.
Oh.
So, but it wasn't her fault. But, I was seated next to troublemakers, so they could, couldn't talk to me, obviously, so I learned all the swear words first. So it was rough, the first year's rough. And then once I got to high school, things got better.
So obviously there's a lot going on in that part of the world right now, and you're seeing the country of Poland and the people of Poland doing pretty amazing things right now, stepping up in ways that's got to make you pretty proud.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also some horrible stuff that you're witnessing, and I can imagine that's bringing up things for you in this time that you went through. And I'm just curious if you might share with us a little bit about what is bringing up in you maybe, and where God is in that, and what you can imagine that they're going through, because you've been through it yourself. So would you be able to share that with us?
Yeah. I think people of Poland are especially empathetic of what's happening because they've been there before. We have a history of a country being invaded over and over. Poland was not on the European map for over 100 years. They were divided into the Russian, Austria-Hungary, and Germany zones under occupation for all that time. And then, of course, World War I and World War II, were terrible. I have many family stories of terrible things that my family went through from both the Russians and the Germans during the war. I had members of my family who died in Auschwitz, who were killed in Katyn in the Russian forests. And so I think the Polish people really feel for the Ukrainians because they've been there and it's part of our history. They've suffered there, and there's some of them still alive who, my grandmother's 96 now and she was 18 during the war, so she's still, she was there. And then those stories are passed down our generations. And of course, living under communism, many of us experienced that, and so, the Poles want to protect the Ukrainians and not want them to have to, go through an occupation like that. So I think it comes from their faith and their strength during that time. That I think Polish people are very, they persevere, they're very strong. So are the Ukrainians, as obvious by their fighting. But I think they just really can relate personally to what's happening. And so that's why they're so open. And, I think they're very, faithful people, and so they also, that's part of their faith, is that that they help those in need, and so they're acting out on it.
So I know that you've been emotionally involved in this, probably, we're all emotionally involved, but you, out of all people, are seeing things through a totally different lens, and I'm just wondering how God is ministering to you during this time, or how you see God at work in your own soul as you watch this.
I think God is connecting me more back to my family and to my roots, definitely, and kind of questioning and helping me to kind of understand myself better. I just realized the other day, I'm always for the underdog, and why? Well, that's part of that, and I didn't realize that about myself. I think we're always growing in our faith and growing in who we are, and God leads us in that, and this is just another way of connecting to, I think, my roots and back to my family, and just, knowing that it's, the strength is where we get the strength from God and faith, and that's evident in the history and how people are acting now and how people acted in the past. So it's hard, definitely, seeing what's happening.
So when we see this happening, what's going on, is there anything that you're, I guess, doing as a response personally? Because I think all of us are like, okay, what can we do? And so it's like, well, what are you doing? And then maybe that, I don't know if that can help guide us as we think about what can we do, right? So what is something that you're doing as you're seeing this, or that as a response?
Well, I'm connecting to a lot of my Polish friends that maybe I haven't connected to in a while, who live here in the U.S., as well as, keeping track with the family in Poland. I mean, it is hard to know exactly what to do, because it's a war zone, and I know there are people going in to fight from other countries there. I certainly want to support, and do whatever I can, but it's hard to know what to do in tangible ways right now, other than really praying for them. And letting them know, everybody who's there, that we support them if they need anything. And
what
just
are you praying?
Keeping the conversations.
What are you praying?
Oh, I'm praying that Putin, feels the presence of God, and that he has a change of heart, that he realizes what he's doing, and that this stops immediately. That no more people have to die. And then just the trauma that this will cause for years, that we can avoid that.
It is interesting to think from a theological perspective. I know this is also part of this conversation, that we often want to blame God for things like this. We want to blame God, as we do in our individual lives as well, which I'm sure we all go through. But that the scripture is pretty clear to point out that our misfortune is often ourselves, right? I mean, not that that's a right answer for the Ukrainian people right now, or even the Polish people. But that it's human led, not God led. And so knowing that, I think that's the faith of the question we have to ask ourselves as people of faith is, where is God in this situation? And where are we as people of faith in this situation? That's sort of
are
a
you
general
asking that as a question?
Yeah, just sort of a general.
Where are we? Yeah.
I think God certainly feels our pain in this, and everyone's pain. And there will be beautiful stories that come out of this, maybe stories of faith and stories of love that people have shown to each other, that they wouldn't have those opportunities otherwise. I mean, of course, we hate to have the war, have to bring us together, but sometimes it's these terrible things that make us question our own humanity and what we do ourselves,
Right.
And make us better people.
Right. And I think it's interesting because we often get mad that it would take, at that answer, because it would take this to bring forth that, but then it's like, well, we should have started bringing forth that before conflict even got to this point. So it is interesting. We always, that whole where is God, and we always it's easy to blame God. He's easy to blame.
Yeah.
I do feel like this conflict feels a little bit different than previous conflicts, in part because COVID made our world very small. The pandemic made our world very small. And we, for maybe the first time in our at least recent history, or have recognized the connectedness between humanity, And so for the first time, I think, in any recent war, it's like, oh, this is far away, but it absolutely affects us. And I don't know that we've ever, since World War II maybe, haven't had a response. I mean, there are conflicts everywhere, right? But this one in particular, I think, shrunk because COVID shrunk our world. And I find it interesting, like, I was reading an article, I was mentioning this prior to our conversation, about Ukrainian pastors, Protestant pastors actually, evangelical pastors, calling into account Russian evangelical pastors to take a stand. And they wrote a letter signed by 400, because it was capped at 400 evangelical pastors opposing the Kremlin and what's happening out of Moscow, which puts them in jeopardy of 15 years in jail, quoting basically Bonhoeffer and saying this is part of our faith as well. And it was very inspiring. At the same time, I was like, there are Russian evangelical pastors?
Right.
And as a pastor, that's shameful that I'm not even thinking about my brothers and sisters who are in faith in these nations all the time.
Right.
All the time.
Right.
And how courageous how much courage you must have to be a person in leadership and faith in times like these. Yeah.
So I hear connection and courageous are kind of, I mean, she was saying like the war has brought out for her connecting with friends and then finding that courage within us. So maybe that's what this war is doing for us, is that it's calling us to connect and find deep connection with people, and also look within ourselves to find that courage to stand up for the things that matter to stand up for, rather than the things that seem innocuous and trivial and whatever. So that's our challenge.
And there's clearly a call in the scriptures for us to invite the sojourner and refugee into our fellowship. That is a clear call. It was the Israelites were refugees. That's what they were. They were sojourners and aliens in the land. Jesus was a refugee. And so that's a large part of our calling as the church. And so it has made me question. People have asked a lot during this time, what can we do? And I think the church, the Western church, the American church, has a very significant and important role to play in the global refugee problem. And I don't know that I hope that we as a congregation explore that more. I know we have brothers and sister congregations that are, like our La Costa Presbyterian has been housing a refugee Russian family for like 2 years now on their campus. And I feel like that's, the church in history has often been a place of refuge for people. And what can we do? I think we could do something like that. It feels radical, but it's not radical. It's just following the call that we've been given, but I think it does take sacrifice. It takes sacrifice to do that.
And the homeless, in a sense, are refugees.
Real quick, so the Presbyterian disaster relief. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What that organization is, or how, it's part of obviously the Presbyterian Church, but what does it do? What's its purpose? I just think FEMA Presbyterian version, but is it?
Yeah, sort of. I think there's. Obviously, there's a lot of causes to give to right now, and you can give your money anywhere.
Right.
And money is sometimes the only thing we can give at present. I think also we'll get to this in a second, but I think there are significant sacrifices that we can make as a people even now. Becoming less dependent on oil would be something easy we can do. It's not easy. Right. But making changes in our own lives, if people are suffering, we can also make changes to suffer, even though that suffering is super minor compared to. But we've chosen as a church to collect money for Presbyterian disaster assistance just because they're an arm of the PCUSA. And they've been around a long time, and they're involved in disasters around the world. And they're involved in refugee help internationally, not just in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe, but all over. So in giving to them, we are supporting refugees worldwide. We have specified our donations right now to go to the Eastern European refugee problem, but they're on the ground. They work specifically with churches in those regions that are offering assistance to refugees, and so they're on the ground with their people. So it's it's a way that we know that our money is going through people of faith to help people. And as Alicia has already mentioned several times, particularly Poland, which is a very faith-filled country, and there's a lot of Polish people speaking that very loudly right now, which is inspiring. But we know that our money gets to support those organizations that are helping preach the gospel as they invite people in.
All right, so final question. As we sit here and we wonder what can we do as individuals, what would you say, from your perspective, I guess, is what would be the top priority or top thing that we could do as a response to this crisis?
I think right now, especially, the most important thing is to pray for the people of Ukraine and for this conflict to resolve. We as a community can be more involved and sponsor maybe a refugee family here in San Diego. There are certainly refugees here today as well. We can be more open and educate ourselves about other cultures and their experiences, and be sensitive and mindful of what they're going through. Talk to other people who are refugees, maybe see in your communities, if there are any people in your communities who are refugees, who have that background. and how you can help to support them and be more loving towards them. So those are all things that we can do here on the ground before any Ukrainian refugees arrive.
So one of the things that we are going to be doing as a response as a community is we are going to pray. So not only as individuals, but we're going to come together on March 16th, which is Wednesday, March 16th at noon. So that's during your lunch hour. You can come here and we're going to be in the sanctuary and we're going to have a time of prayer for the people in Ukraine and in Russia and refugees around the world as well. And we're also going to be live streaming that event. So if you can't make it, you can join us on our website. We're also going to encourage you to give to the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, which is on our screen, the different ways that you can give to that here at our church, or you can go directly to them. But we would like to thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you, Alicia and Carla, for being here, and you guys have a great week.